Welcome to HurricaneCenterLive.com. I'm Alex Garcia, Director of the National Tropical Weather Conference and Executive Producer of these programs. These programs are made possible by USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, and Plylocks Hurricane Clips. These programs are also a team effort with Bill Reed, the former Director of the National Hurricane Center, and Tim Smith, Chief Meteorologist of KRGV-TV. And now, here's Tim Smith.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live for Friday, October the 9th, and we're still tracking a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. So here we are again, and it seems like we've been around this so many times this season, and we're doing it again. And we're going to get right to it this morning. But before we do, we just want to thank our sponsors who are with us once again. We want to thank the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the host city for the National Tropical Weather Conference. Hope to be there again soon. I'd like to thank USAA for their sponsorship of our events, and also Plylocks, the Hurricane Clips people. Those are available as well. But we've got a great program to get to today. A lot to talk about with the hurricane approaching land along the Louisiana coast. First, we'll get an update on the storm from Bill, and then we'll go to Hal Needham. And I see Mark Suddeth is with us this morning as well. So, Bill, let's start with you. Let's get an update on what's going on. Bill Reed, good morning.
Okay, just a minute. I'll get back in here with you. It's nice to see everybody again. A busy day today because this is the landfall day, so I'll get right into the graphics I have, and pretty soon we'll have fun with our speakers on there. Get the one I want. Let's start with the newest advisory. There's not a whole lot to show you on because it's been right on track all along, but as it is, we still have a 100-knot storm. It's forecast as it has been for days now to make landfall in southwest Louisiana early this evening. It's supposed to weaken some, and just how much of that is probably a subject to debate, and we'll just have to wait and see at this stage of the game because it's not going to change the impacts all that much, what happens with it as it makes its approach to land. I had the surge up here. That forecast has not changed. The impact of the surge is going to be pretty much where it was for Laura, maybe a little further east for the peak of it, if the center goes a little further east, and the fact that it has a slightly bigger eye, but still looking at a 7 to 11 foot maximum surge in the area just to the east where the center makes landfall, with diminishing amounts on either side of it. Here in Texas, we've had a lot of beach erosion and tide run up to the dunes, all the way from Brownsville all the way up to Sabine Pass. And here on the upper coast, that'll continue until we get the landfall. Rainfall forecast has not changed significantly from yesterday. Broad area of 6 to 10 inches of rain across Louisiana in the lower Mississippi Valley, and then some isolated amounts as much as 15. And that probably should do it as quickly as the storm's is forecast to continue doing as it moves on inland. One of the reasons we're expecting it to continue to weaken is it's currently still over fairly warm water, but it's rapidly moving into an area of a much cooler water over the continental shelf below 26°C, and that's usually a sign that we're going to lose the instability and lose some of the intensity of the storm. On the satellite, if it comes up, there we go. Center of the storm is still really obscured in the clouds, and you notice that the big cirrus canopy is displaced off to the west. And the best I could get on the analysis is the outflow is not nearly as strong over here on the east side as it is on the north and northwest side of the storm. The other key feature is the slow approach of this trough that extends from northern Mexico up into Oklahoma. Yesterday it was farther west in Texas, but not by much. But it is inducing enough of a southwesterly flow to give A, some shear to the storm, which would aid in weakening, and B, induce a more eastward component to the current northward motion that we're seeing as it approaches landfall in there. Just a quick shot of the visible. It's probably hard to see on most people, but there still is a lot of deep convection with hot tops punching up through the cirrus canopy around the center of the storm there. So it hasn't really shown sign of losing any structure yet. And there's not much time for it to, if it's going to do that, if it actually will. We got planes flying in it right and left. They're going to be in it all the way up through landfall. The current NOAA flight in there, point out it's been wobbling. It's a little bit west of due north and a little bit east of due north, a little bit west. It looks like the latest one, it was back to due north on the movement there, but the forecast is for a little more of an easterly component. The other thing, these are 10,000 foot or 700 millibar winds in there, and the hurricane force winds at flight level now go out on the eastern semicircle all the way to the outer legs on the flight, and it has expanded somewhat, probably not as much as they said. The tropical storm force winds are out to about, I think, around 160 at the farthest out here to the east, and it's thinking it might have gotten a little bigger than that, but it didn't. Let's see what else. Okay, the radar is well within range. It's been within range of the coastal radar since yesterday afternoon, and now in the Doppler range of the Houston radar. And all I've done there is draw the range and distance, or bearing and distance from the expected point of landfall on the.
We're not seeing your radar, Bill. We're not seeing your radar.
Why not?
We're still on recon.
I don't understand that. Okay. I'll go back. Back to you got the recon there? I don't know why it won't do that. Okay. It should. Oh, well. If I showed you the radar, I'd show you had about 110 miles to landfall on there, and a fairly ragged looking eye on the radar presentation right now. Surface obs, for most of the early morning pre-dawn hours, we had tropical storm force gusts down on the immediate coast along with the high surf. It's now working its way up into Galveston Bay, and it's showing up on the Louisiana coast. And as typical, most of the rigs are shut down up in this area, so we're not getting a lot of reports in the direct path in there. This is the one buoy just off of Galveston that's now sustained tropical storm with higher gusts. Last night, the buoy down near where Tim is, about a couple hundred miles east of Brownsville, caught the eye. The green lines of pressure, there's a big sharp V as the pressure dropped as it went into the eye, and the winds also dropped to just about almost down the calm in there. 953 millibars and gusts to around 100 miles an hour were experienced. At about that time, they had 35-foot seas. And that kind of conditions expected to continue. This is the European model wave forecast, and starting about now, that dark red center in there is in the 25 to 30 foot range near the center there, and you can see by the arrows which way the waves are emanating out of the center. And of course, that'll drop off in the shallow continental shelf in the very heavy surf. That'll keep going well into probably tomorrow before we totally lose the beach erosion factor we're getting from the storm as it goes further inland. Okay. From the tides and currents, we're going to go to the guys on the ground and talk about things they're looking at. But you notice that blue line is the astronomical tide. Tide should be dropping on the Louisiana coast, and instead it's going up there still as the approach of the storm. It's already running about 3 feet above what the astronomical tide would give you in that area there, and even down the coast here in the Galveston area, we're seeing the same thing. So the tide forecasts showing that the waters are starting to flood some of the lowest lying areas are coming to pass as we expected in that area there. It's a great site if you ever want to look at the tides and currents very accurately during a storm, called Tides and Currents. It's a NOAA product. One more thing, this was the forecast from 48 hours ago. It was forecast, it was a weekend over the Yucatan, was forecast to become major again. and stay major until this morning, which it did. Move northwest, then turn north, which it did. And the remainder of the forecast had it coming ashore just to the east of between Cameron and Vermilion Bay. Had it a little earlier than what was shown, but other than that, the verification was quite spectacular, and the confidence they had in the forecast probably allowed a minimum amount of the coastline to actually be evacuated. So with that, if you got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them, or otherwise we'll, Tim, take it over and send it to the next speaker.
All right, that's amazing information. You're right. You know, that forecast is just right on the money. And I will say that if it may be 50 miles off, if you're in Louisiana, that makes a big difference. If you're on the East Coast, you're going, they hit it right on the money. But ultimately, this one was pretty darn close, no matter how you look at it. And right in the bullseye where this is headed is our friend Hal Needham, who was with us yesterday, driving toward the system. And now, Hal, you're there. So, Hal, where are you, and what are you doing in the middle of this thing?
Hey, Tim, Bill, and Alex. Bill, a great presentation. I always like hearing your take on this. Hey, everyone. My name's Hal Needham. I'm lead scientist with CNC Catastrophe and National Claims. I'm in Delcombe, Louisiana, and actually I'm going to step out and show you what I'm seeing here. So I'm just north of Vermilion Bay, really where we expect the highest storm surge to be. I'm a storm surge scientist, and I run USurge. It's the U.S. Storm Surge database. So I like to be on the ground and kind of see what's happening here. And I'll turn my camera here so you can see where I'm at. I'm pointing now towards Vermilion Bay. I'm about 8 miles north of Vermilion Bay on some bayous and a canal. And we're expecting a pretty big saltwater surge to push up here. I think the latest from NOAA said 7 to 11 feet of inundation above normally dry ground. This area took about 4 to 5 feet of storm surge where I'm at right now during Hurricane Laura in August. And the area of Sippermore Point, which is kind of very much in Vermilion Bay, took about 6 to 7 feet of saltwater surge above ground level during Laura as well. I want to show you this gauge that I installed. So I try to install these community flood information system gauges. And so this one is not calibrated with a local elevation certificate. Sometimes they are. But this gauge right here, when I installed it yesterday evening around 10 p.m., the water was at 6 inches, and now it's at 20 inches. So the water's come up about 14 inches, and it should be falling now. The tides really started falling, according to the USGS gauge, down by Vermilion Bay around 7 a.m. They were getting off of their high tide, and so there's about a 3-hour delay from what I understand up here to Delcombe. So the water should have really started falling here around, noticeably around 9:30 to 10 a.m., but it's still coming up. Again, we've come up about 14 inches since yesterday evening about 10 p.m. I'm over here by the wharf, and you can see some shrimp boats. And in fact, some of these people will stay on the boats and adjust the ropes and kind of just keep an eye on their boats during the storm. You can see some planks here knocked out by Laura's storm surge, so you have to be careful where you're walking around here. And check this out. There's obviously a shrimp boat there, but there's a restaurant bar here. And look at this high water mark from Hurricane Laura. So Laura, we think, put about 52 inches of salt water above normally dry ground, and that brought a water level up to about 33 inches. If you can see it here on this building, I measured this water level here is about 33 inches above ground level. So if you can imagine taking about a 3-foot storm surge inside your building in August, and then 6 weeks later, here comes another flood event. So how will this flood event, how will the storm surge relate in Delta compared to Laura? Well, a lot of times we can compare one storm to the next. So one thing is that Laura at landfall and pre-landfall was producing stronger winds. And so that generally will drive more storm surge. The other thing is Laura's wind fields were larger. So the tropical storm force winds for Laura before landfall were going out about 180 nautical miles. The last I saw in the forecast advisory with Delta was going out about 140 nautical miles. And the 50-knot winds, the difference was 90 nautical miles for Laura and I think 50 nautical miles for Delta. So Delta, the wind fields are a little bit smaller, and so that generally will push less surge. And and the surge will be less extensive. But another difference is that Delta's moving quite a bit slower. I think Laura was moving along perhaps, I don't know, maybe 17, 18 miles an hour at landfall. And I think in the advisory earlier this morning, Delta was moving about 12 miles an hour. So from what I've seen in these areas of Louisiana, a slower moving storm has more time to push storm surge. So the slower movement would tend to enhance or increase the storm surge with Delta, but the weaker intensity and the smaller wind fields would mean that Laura surge would be higher. So my gut feeling here is that Laura would have produced a higher storm surge by maybe a foot or two in a lot of these areas, but it's very track dependent. As you know, storm surge is extremely localized. So if you shift that track a little bit, it can change things a lot. So I'll keep an eye here on the, before I sign off here, I'll just show you one last time, but I have this gauge here. This one is not calibrated with elevation certificates. Some of ours are in different storms, but I'll be keeping an eye on that here. And I do think the water will get up over the wharf level. And in this town, there are a lot of houses elevated, but some of them are really slab on grade and could be affected and flooded in this storm, as well as some of these commercial buildings as well. So again, I'm Hal Needham. I run USurge, and I'm always trying to collect storm surge data the best I can and put it into our national network and our National Storm Surge Database. I have a moment or two if anyone has any questions, and I just love hearing you guys as well, your great analysis and interpretation of the storm from the studio and other people in the field as well.
Very interesting. Have you run across anyone else, Hal, that's putting any instruments out in the area you're at?
Well, actually, I think Mark Sudduth, who I think is on the call, I was in touch with a guy named Don Moe over at Sippermore Point yesterday, and I think Mark put out some cameras. I don't know as far as any other instruments or anything like that, but there's such a need for just collecting data in these flood events, whether it's an instrument or insurance adjusters going out afterwards with the tape measure. I think that the data really help us not only understand what happened in this storm, but better predict for the future. So I did see some anemometers set up along the roadside out near here and west of here that are measuring wind speed. And the very last thing I wanted to share yesterday, just my perspective from on the ground, I was shocked to see so many debris piles in Lake Charles and other parts of Southwest Louisiana. Usually in my travels, South Louisiana, Upper Texas coast are very well prepared, but just taking a hit from a Category 4 hurricane 6 weeks ago, I think a lot of people, it was all they could do to get a blue tarp on their roof and start cleaning out the debris and get a pile of that out by the street. A lot of those have not yet been picked up, and that's a concern as the winds pick up in Hurricane Delta.
Absolutely.
We had Mark Sudduth was on the call and then cut out and was back on the call and cut out. I think he's in a cell phone Never Land out there, so we may or may not get him in here. But where are you going now that you've got your instrumentation set? Where are you going to stay safe for the storm?
Oh, so I will monitor it here. One of the first things I always check whenever I'm documenting on the ground, I want to make sure I never get trapped, right? So I love parking garages. In a middle-sized or larger city, parking garages are the best. In a small town like Delcom, they don't have parking garages. So there are some hills and some elevated areas around here. Surprisingly, some areas around Vermilion Bay have salt domes that are naturally occurring features that can get up more than 70, 80 feet. So there is some elevation in this part of Louisiana, although it's predominantly flat. But there are some areas around here that a little bit of relief that I could get up. But I may also pull up north of here over by Abbeville or some of the other towns as well. I always make sure I can't get trapped by the salt water, because that's the biggest concern in storm surge field work.
Marcel has a question for you. He said, does it matter the intensity right now? At this point, what's the most important thing to evaluate? The directions of the wind or the topography of the region?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the topography makes storm surge so localized. And so a lot of the bays, storm surge really will enhance very much inside bays. And a lot of that is forced locally by the winds as it makes landfall and as it's really moving on the coast. I published 2 papers in 2014 that studied really how storms produce storm surge. And they looked at really the size and the intensity. And what we found in both of those papers is that storm surge correlates best with pre-landfall wind speed. So what's going on, and that correlation peaked at 18 hours before landfall. So for the wind speed, and then also for the size, we found that the pre-landfall size of the 50-knot winds correlated best with storm surge as well. So we often look, not just right at landfall, but in those, say, 12 to 18 hours before landfall, how large is it and how strong is it? And so with a weakening storm like this, one of the concerns is imagine if wind shear really kicks in and some of those cooler waters, imagine if the storm does get down to say like a lower end Cat 2 or even a Cat 1, people might say, oh, the danger is going to pass. But pre-landfall, 12 to 18 hours, it was maybe a Cat 3. So the ocean has a memory for sure. And that's one of the dangers with a weakening storm is that the storm surge is often higher than people expect because it's correlating more with the offshore size and the wind speed.
What do you do with all the data you collect in a system like this? You're out collecting and put it to good use.
You know, really one of my favorite things is to work with communities and to build out their entire flood history and to help them understand, you know, the frequency of these floods and comparing those, say, with the FEMA models, which give us a base flood elevation. And, you know, just to compare, is that how confident are we in that base flood elevation, which is the guidance on how high people should build in a given community. Take, for example, Pensacola, Florida, the base flood elevations in a lot of that community right by the harbor is 7 feet. But they've had 3 surges exceeding 9 feet. But 2 of those surge events, one was in 1906 and the other was 1926. So a lot of people say, well, we calibrated this with 30 or 40 years of data. But if you go to Pensacola and look back at the last 40 years, the only big surge you see is Ivan. And it's so much bigger than everything else. You think it's like a million-year storm, you know? But once you go back far enough, you begin to say, hang on a second, there were 3 Ivans, not 1. And so our risk is higher than we thought. So that's one of the things we really like to do is work with communities, build out their entire flood history so that we can put current storms in context and then do a better job of long-range risk assessment as well.
Bill, jump back in. I can see you got a question on your mind. Go for it.
Yeah, that I'm pretty sure, but do you see the evidence that the rivers or bayous are running high at all over there? Or I'm pretty sure they're not because I don't think they've had a lot of antecedent rain.
Yeah, they did not seem to be running that high. What I noticed last night, it almost seemed like the wind was almost out of like the northeast. It did seem like the surface water was pushing towards Vermilion Bay, but at the same time, the water levels were rising. And that I thought was interesting. But in general, I think this part of the country has been fairly dry, except for the rainfall from the tropical systems this year.
Okay, good.
You know, we're glad to see you back in there giving us information on this, but I'm sure the locals are not glad to see you and Mark and Josh and Rob and all these guys back where they just were. What's the reaction to everybody coming back to town for another storm?
You know what? There's a like bipolar. There's a mix. On one side, it's like, you know, people always say, oh, we don't want to see Jim Cantore come, right? It's kind of like the joke because it means there's a storm. But what I've really heard people here, you know, they've said we're not New Orleans, we're not Houston. A lot of times we don't get the media coverage, and I've really heard a resounding "Don't forget about us." You know, these people. I think there's definitely randomness in play. I mean, there's no reason why you'd have 2 landfalls in roughly the same position. It's random. And, you know, if this was a major metro area, I think it would be more of a story. So I really sense that people here, they need help. A lot of people are really struggling. Again, these are tough, resilient people. And usually when I drive through South Louisiana before a storm, they look very prepared. Seeing these piles of debris yesterday, I just thought these people aren't prepared, and it's not because of negligence. It's just they just got hammered just a few weeks ago. So I think one of the things that I'm going to stay here all weekend, actually, and just be in touch with nonprofits, churches. I really want to find out what do people need and how can we get that to them. And I think it's really important not to forget about the people here.
Good information. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bill, anything else before we let Hal get back to work? Because I know he's got plenty to do today.
Nope. It's to write it out and hope for the best.
All right. Hal, thank you. Stay safe, my friend.
Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Hal. Bill, great job again. As always, great insight on what's going on out there. We appreciate that. By this time tomorrow, we'll know what we have dealt with, which will be interesting. And next week, we'll kind of come back and see what we dealt with. So thanks, Bill. Thanks, Hal.
We've got a couple of questions here on this side, Tim. One from Sergio Lozano wants to know what the coastal is looking like. What's the run-up in coastal flooding erosion looking like there on South Padre?
On South Padre, I can show you that if you'd like to see it. Give me just a second, and we'll show you exactly what it looks like. Let's do this one. This is from South Padre from this morning. Let me do this. This is this morning right here. And that's South Padre. That's when the storm, the high tide was at 1:15 a.m. And this video was shot probably around 7:30 a.m. Normally there's about 100 yards of beach there. And as you can see, there's no more beach anymore. When you look at this walkway, you can see that the water has been all the way up onto the walkway, and water's another one. Water has come up into the drainage system. There we go. So I think one of the interesting things on South Padre, get this to stop so I can hear myself. On South Padre is that water backs up into the storm drainage system. So you start seeing water just coming up out of the drains onto Padre Boulevard. And so the city streets start to flood, even though it's not water coming from either side, it's coming up through the drains. So something unique in that. So, but it was running about 1.5 feet above predicted level this morning. So pretty significant. Thanks, Serge, for the question.
All right, I've got a video coming in from Mark Sudduth, who says he's on the road, a little tough, but he did send us a video. So let me see if I can run that real quick.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think we're going to have the audio on that, but he is there. Let me double check just to make sure. Yeah, he's there. We don't have the audio on it. So let me see if I can work that up. I'm going to put the camera back for you on, Tim.
Okay, that sounds good. While you work on that, so you know, it's going to be a few hours as this moves in, and Bill, we'll be watching. I know you're posting pretty regularly on your side as well, Bill. So thank you for that, and we will. You know, we've got a scheduled program next week, but we may do something a little bit more on this at some point between now and then, or maybe spend a little time in next week's program talking about what we saw. Maybe get Hal back on here, Bill, and something like that, because I think it'd be good, and maybe Mark as well.
Yeah, so I had just feathered a question there. With Lake Charles radar down, there's some holes in the radar coverage. Well, the University of Oklahoma has a mobile Doppler radar system that they deploy for these, and they've set it up so that they'll be able to augment what they have at the office at Lake Charles. So it'll certainly help for any landfalling tornado aspects, because they'll have the in-close velocity data to help them there.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, we all saw the pictures of the Lake Charles radar that took a serious beating. I haven't talked to Barry, who was with us earlier this week, about whether or not they're backing up Lake Charles again. I'm sure they are. Ready to go to action again. Brownsville, the Weather Service, backing up Lake Charles for quite a while after Laura, after Lake Charles backed up Brownsville during Hannah. So the cooperation still working there. Well, we could, but I'm delayed here, but let's see a little bit of that video running. Alex, do we have it? Is it running?
Yeah, I'm just getting ready to bring it up here. Let me see if I can bring this up full screen so that we can bring that up here. And let me swing over on camera too. And we'll see if we can punch that up.
Hey, National Tropical Weather Conference folks, Mark Sudduth, Hurricane Track here. Got Greg Nordstrom from Mississippi State University to my right, and one of our supporters, Brent Lynn from the Virgin Islands, behind us in the support vehicle. We're down in Louisiana getting ready to head to the Esther area to set up another live camera. We have a live camera right now in Grand Chenier, out in the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge, over in Creole. We have a camera in Freeport, Texas. That's actually a permanent camera. And each of these locations also has a pressure sensor, as well as temperature, humidity, and dew point, but we want that pressure. And we have a camera too in Sippermore Point along Vermilion Bay on the north side. So a lot going on. We've accomplished a lot. We still have a lot to set up in anticipation of Hurricane Delta as it comes in. And hopefully later today, we can go up near I-10, since this looks like the landfall will be near or after dark. Just before that, we're going to try to launch our weather balloon, our special Herbie, HURRB Hurricane Research Balloon payload. Has a couple of GoPros and a weather sensor on it, and that goes to the stratosphere way above Hurricane Delta. That would be pretty amazing. We're going to try to do that later. Couldn't join in the Zoom meeting live because of bandwidth issues, so I figured I'd cut this video and send it to Alex, and hopefully we can get it included in. That's what's happening from the road. I'm Mark Sudduth. Thanks. See y'all later.
All right.
All right. Get to see Mark there. We Fascinating stuff, and I think both Alex and Bill that a lot of times in the general public, there's this impression that, hurricanes come in, they do their damage, and then we try to figure out what happened after the fact. And some of that's true, but I don't think people realize how much effort and how much work and how many people like Mark and like Hal and even the chasers like Josh and Jim Eds and our friends like that, how much goes into the research during the storm. I mean, it's not just to go stand in front of a wall of wind, but it's to actually do research for us and help us understand these storms better.
Well, there's at least 2 or 3 universities that deploy a tremendous amount of measuring equipment out in advance of these to help us understand what happens at landfall.
Right. And we learn more with each and every one, and hopefully we get a little bit better and the storm surge forecast gets better. Not that they're not good already, but they just continue to improve because of folks like the folks that we're talking to today. So good stuff. So we hope to have these guys back on after the storm to let us know what they saw. So again, thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it, Bill. As always, thank you.
My pleasure.
We'll thank our sponsors, of course, and they're all right here on the mask that all of our speakers get. USAA, the City of South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Plylock's Hurricane Clips. That's these guys right here. They're getting heavy usage this year up and down the U.S. coast as we continue in this incredibly busy hurricane season. The good thing is, and Bill, I haven't looked at anything else today, but there's nothing else out there for a while, at least a day or two after Delta. The Atlantic looks clear. Is that the case still?
I didn't see anything that warranted our attention over the next 5 to 7 days, and I don't get too carried away beyond that.
So stand by and stand back. All right, gentlemen. Thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's part of it. Thanks again to our sponsors.